So we wanted to talk about supply chain change, right? It's been a constant across the industry over the last 4 decades at a minimum. And we asked Phil Madans and Laura Dawson to share we want them to share their experiences on technology standards, workflow investments over their careers in the industry. I think, it's hard to imagine a gathering where people don't already know you, or you're not already the best known people in the room. But maybe there are a few people who would benefit from just an introduction. So if I could start with you, Phil. What brought you to publishing, and what have you been doing for the last 40 years?
All right, I thought I'd do this year by year, starting in 1983. I was a young rail splitter in the south of Brooklyn, living in a one-room hut when I got the call. First of all, I just want to say this is an absolutely beautiful venue. This is the first time we're here. I do miss the stuffed elephant a little bit, but we'll get through it. I actually started in publishing in 1983 as an editorial assistant at Crown Publishers, making a whopping $11,000 a year. And I only mention that because, first of all, that's not actually accurate. I retired from Hachette on April 4th, so I'm still transitioning out of that, slowly but surely. And I brought it up because as I was getting ready to retire, I thought it'd be fun to look up what $11,000 in 1983 is worth in $2025. And it turned out to be about $35,000. So while a lot has changed in all those years I've been in publishing, some things still haven't changed all that much, and we should all be ashamed of ourselves. So I started there, and I started in editorial, but then I moved over into operations. It really started for me in 1990 when I moved over to Warner Books. I started as the director of inventory management. I was in charge of mass market, ordering mass markets. I was in charge of our print histories and our in-print figures. Those figures, and this we're going back again to 1990, we were still on those old green screen CRTs, no PCs or anything. And those figures were kept on cards, on index cards, in little boxes outside of my office. So when somebody wanted to get any of that information, they could do it 2 ways. They could come down to us and go through all of these boxes one by one, title by title, to get this information when books are being reprinted or what the imprint figures are when marketing needed that. Or they would call us constantly for that information. I'm saying, this is not the way to do this. I had been interested in technology, and once we moved into the Time Life building several months later and we got PCs, the first thing I did was I went out and I taught myself databases. Got a database program, and I started automating all of those processes for my department, so that we could print out purchase orders instead of doing them on typewriters and whiting out when they had to be changed, which they had to be changed a lot, and also for capturing that data in a place where it could be kept. So if something ever happened to that office, we didn't lose the entire history of the company. And that took a while, and I finally got it all in there, and it was great. But I had all that data, but I had no way of sharing it with people. They were still coming to me and calling me up on the phone because there was no other way to do it. And all of this is about timing and opportunity and luck. Just about that time, the web was growing, online sales was growing, and intranets were growing. So I built an intranet in my office on an old PC, and I created the Warner Wide Web and to serve out that information. Then I had to try to get people to use it, which was another challenge because they still kept calling them up. But what it did was, it got me really interested in how that technology could really help people and make things easier, and it set me on a completely different path to what I was doing. I became much more interested in the technology I started working on. I actually inadvertently built a title management system in building this thing. I had no idea what I was doing. But then we started looking at publishing programs. Before this, it was all back office stuff. It was all order entry and inventory and distribution and all that. There was nothing for the publishing people. Once I started doing that and other people saw what I was doing, that they were doing it in their own departments, and I was helping them do it in their own departments. There was ad promo, there was production to do POs and things like that. And so I moved in that direction, and one day I went to my boss. I was reporting to the CFO at the time, and I said, you know, this guy that works for me can really do a much better job with the inventory. I'd really rather do this other stuff. I'd really rather get more into the technology of it. And I thought I was going to get fired, and he said, no, that's a great idea. And I went to talk to the president. He said, that's a great idea. We need somebody who actually understands the business, because that's where I came from. You know, when you're in inventory management, you deal with everybody in the company, sales and editorial and promotion and everybody, and who understands the business and can translate that to the IT people who are going to create the systems, because they kind of got tired of everybody having their own little systems running in the company that you know, are not particularly standard. So that's when I started transitioning over to IT, and then at that time, this was around 1999, the Wall Street Journal sent out a call to action for all publishers to start digitizing their content. I don't know what we're going to do for it at the time. E-books were starting to come out. You know, reuse was a big thing, and then you know, all of us, you know, especially everyone in the Big Five, started putting in digital asset management systems. And that was my first big system, working on a big system implementation. I was probably the company's first BA on the publishing side. And that was a big project. And one of the things that project showed us, this is, you know, nothing exists in a vacuum. Things just evolve, and they lead along to different things. One of the things that happened with the digital asset management system, we wanted to add metadata from other systems into it so people wouldn't have to enter all this different metadata. What we discovered in all of our systems, that all of our different systems store that metadata differently. Our mainframe, our authors in a mainframe, Paul, you remember this. Paul was there. Our authors in our mainframe were all caps, first name, last name in the same field. But we couldn't get, we had to get names from some of our other systems too, you know, depending on whether we had a contract or whether we didn't have a contract. And the names in our contract system were fielded properly in upper and lower case. So when we brought all that data in there, we said, well, we have two different sets of data in here. Isn't that ugly? And that's when we got interested in metadata. And around the same time, you know, we realized that we had to standardize our metadata. Now, in those days, of course, our metadata just existed in our internal systems. They weren't going anywhere. You know, we didn't deal directly with the consumer. Nothing was consumer-facing. But then, you know, Onyx came along. Amazon came along, BNN.com came along, all the other online e-tailers came along, and they needed data, and they needed a way to get data. And that's when Onyx came along, and all of that data that we could keep hidden from everybody was all of a sudden becoming consumer-facing.
I think this is probably the inflection point where we should ask Laura.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
this is your pain point.
Yes. Well, basically, I've worked for a lot of the organizations that are in this room over the course of my career. But I also started in editorial at Doubleday as an editorial assistant for, this was 1987, so the pay had bumped up to $14,000 a year. I know. But I really got interested in the technology side of things with my own work. I was writing short stories and I was sending them out, and I was using, to track the progress of everything, a kind of like Salesforce, but it was a very, very early version of it. And I got really into the different ways that the data about the submissions and whatnot could be faceted, and the kind of reporting that I could do. So when I had the opportunity to work for a company that was putting together a database using Bowker's Books in Print to set up kiosks in Barnes & Noble, among other stores, that I just leapt at that opportunity. And then I wound up at Barnes & Noble working for BarnesandNoble.com, and that is where the metadata piece became really, really critical. As Phil was saying, we were taking data that had only been sort of behind the counter, available only to employees, and we were putting it in front of consumers. And yeah, the all caps problem, that was one of the first problems that we had to solve, because these inventory systems were, these were mainframes and fixed fields, and yeah, it was a mess. And then from there, like I said, I got around a lot and set up a consulting company and sort of spun out of the industry in 2016, but now I'm back.
How did you get started working for BISG?
I was born working for BISG.
It's true of many of our volunteers.
But basically, it was through Onyx. So Barnes & Noble, there was a very important introductory meeting about the metadata problem in 1999. And so I was part of that meeting. It was led by Sandy Paul at the time and Carol Risher of AAP. This was at the AAP offices. It was the first time that Barnes & Noble and Amazon had sat together in a single room. There were lots of smaller retailers there as well that don't exist anymore. This was right before the dot-com bust. So we had Fat Brain, we had Varsity Books, we had, and then we had Dial-A-Book, and just Stanley and Betty, yeah. Just a ton of companies coming together to say, communication is borked, and we really need a standard. And Onyx was going to be that standard.
Phil, how about you?
Not quite as sexy. It was barcodes that brought me to BISG. Yeah. I actually started in the 90s. Sandy Paul recruited me when I was at Warner. And at that point, BISG was mostly about, X12 and EDI and things which I had absolutely no understanding of. But then in the early 2000s, Joe Ganella, Tom Clarkson walked into our offices to meet with Larry.
They were both with Barnes & Noble? They were both with Barnes & Noble?
Yes.
To meet with Larry Kirschbaum, with me. I was still the director of inventory for Warner, and for our CIO, Larry Feldman. They've always had an issue, and it had to do with the mass market paperbacks. The mass market paperbacks were mostly being shipped into the general retail, into the big box stores, into supermarkets, drugstores, that kind of thing, and they were handled by the independent wholesalers. They were not interested in ISBNs, and they weren't interested in EAN codes. All the big box, because all their inventory is handled by a wholesaler. All they wanted to know is that this is a book, it was $6.99. And yes, we had books at $6.99 in those days. And so on the back of the mass markets, we printed a price-specific 12-digit UPC code. Now, the guys from Barnes & Noble came in because GS1, the barcode people, global standards, had decreed that as of January 1st, 2005, it was called Sunrise 2005, all retailers had to be able to scan 13-digit EAN codes. And this 12-digit UPC code drove the trade crazy because all of the rest of the books had EAN codes on the back cover, and that's what they were scanning. And to deal with the mass markets, we had to print the EAN codes on the inside of the cover, and this meant that people had to open the book to scan it. It was a training issue. It was a pain, and it wasn't standard. So that started, and this is when Jeff Abrahams first came on as the executive director. They created, and during this time, and it was interesting that we were talking about how things change, wholesalers took twice as many mass market books as the direct accounts for many, many years until the superstores came about. Superstores had all that room. They needed books. They started ordering more mass market books, and the dynamics changed. And so now the trade had a case to make then saying, you can't go back to this old thing that you're selling twice as many books to the wholesalers, even though 50% of those books usually came back, but that didn't mean anything. You have to do this. This is what we need to do now. So they created a task force, an EAN transition task force that I was volunteered to join. And I did. And then after the first few meetings, this was Fitzfoy and John Bowman were the chairs, but they couldn't continue being the chairs. And they cornered me one day and said, would you like to be the chair? And I did. And I said yes, and I'm glad that I did, because this is where I first learned about BISG, about getting everybody in a room. We had all the wholesalers, we had all the publishers. Some of the people went on a field trip to Albertsons to talk to them. I mean, I knew how mass markets got onto the marketplace, but I didn't know their stories. I didn't know the challenges that the wholesalers have, because they were handling all the inventory. They were actually going to their account systems and putting in data, because the accounts didn't want digital data. They did everything by hand. It's gonna take 2 minutes, because this story really resonates through the rest of my career and all this stuff. One of the people told me that there's this huge supermarket chain on the East Coast, hundreds of stores. And that the way that they would get their data in, they had a data center in their headquarters, and they had 50 people sitting in this data center in front of 50 terminals, and they would key in every product, every price, every promotion, constantly, day after day. And when they asked them, wouldn't digital data be better? And they said, no, we have this, it works. We have the processes, we have the people leave, we train them, it's no big deal. And then there's this other regional supermarket out in the Midwest, I think it was Chicago, 10 or 15 stores. And they jumped on the idea of digital data, because this leveled the playing field for them. This was a competitive advantage. They could get their products, their prices, their sales into their stores faster than the big guys could get into theirs.
Right.
But that whole idea of like, if it's not broke, why should we fix it? Is something that we've heard over and over again. And we could talk about Onyx 3.0, because that was the, right?
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about it later today.
Okay, so you'll hear about it again. But this is the problem, it's inertia. Yeah. You know, it's hard to get started. The bigger the stone, the harder it is to get rolling. And that is something that we've come up against time and time again, and which is really part of this whole, book publishing next.
You've had some real successes around things like metadata, and you've also had some frustrating moments. Maybe let's focus on this, something you're really proud of, something that you've been successful at that really resonated.
I think probably something that it's fairly recent in my career. So I pivoted out of the book industry in 2016, went to work for HBO for a few years, learned a lot there, and then went into ad tech for a company called EDO, which analyzes the effectiveness of ads on TV. And at EDO, I felt like all of the lessons I had learned in publishing had really, I guess, provided me with the ability to do the thing that needed to be done, which was EDO had licensed a taxonomy from a large company called Kantar Media, which I don't even know if it still exists in the same way it did back then, but we had to rip out that taxonomy and replace it with one that we had developed internally by a team in the Philippines who were tagging the ads with a brand and a product, et cetera. So we had to, A, normalize the taxonomy that the Philippines team was creating with their tags, and then B, essentially do spinal replacement surgery, taking out the old taxonomy and putting in the new one. I think that's probably the most challenging thing that I've done. Most of the team that I had recruited to work with me on this came out of the book industry, so they understood first principles of metadata, things like that. And so together we were able to replace this taxonomy in record time. It only took a few months over the summer of COVID.
Phil, you described a process. There was like a 2-year window from sunrise to implementation of ISBN 13.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
which seems kind of astounding.
what happened was the ISBN standard was set to, it coincided with Sunrise 2005. The ISBN was supposed to go to 13 digits January 1st, 2005. And the problem was that nobody paid any attention to that. Yeah. And there were reasons for that. They kept saying, well, and from a US standpoint, we had plenty of 10-digit ISBNs left. It was going to take years and years for us to get through it. But yet, you know, ISBN is an international standard. There are international considerations going on about this. And so the ISBN agency added on another 2 years and said, okay, this is it. You have to get it done by 2007. And then again, BISG, and we were all part of this, jumped in with another task force for the ISBN 13 transition.
Yep.
And we had to move very fast, and it was very complicated for many reasons. First of all, the biggest problem, the biggest obstacle in making any kind of this change are legacy systems. My mainframe couldn't handle a 13-digit ISBN.
Right, yeah, they were hard-coded.
They were hard-coded, and to actually, you know, make that field longer to accommodate it would probably cost more than the actual mainframe was worth. Yeah. And so we couldn't do it, and so we had to find workarounds. And this affected the entire system. This was point of sales systems, everybody's back-end system. Everybody was you know, dialed in the ISBN 13. First of all, Amazon used it for their ASIN, so everybody wanted to keep the ISBN 10, and it took a lot of work. But again, it was, BISG. We had everybody in the room. We talked to everybody in the room. We found out everybody's problems. We did it in a methodical way, very quickly, on where the problems were going to be. And, you know, we got it done by 2007. It was done, kicking and screaming.
Yes.
Even though people still used ISBN 10s, along with everybody still had both the ISBN 13 and the ISBN 10. They still do.
Change dies hard.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it does. And, you know, and it took a long, and it still took a long time. We finally bought our first 979 ISBN. You know, after the 15th anniversary of it coming into existence, we finally got one. But it did standardize everything. And at the end of the day, it was very important to do that because it matched the EAN. We already had 13-digit ISBNs as part of the EAN code. They were already there. And so, you know, it could have been a lot worse if that wasn't the case, but it was. But the transition about, like, one thing, you can go from an ISBN to an ISBN 13, but you can't go from an ISBN 13 to an ISBN 10. They're not compatible that way, and that was a big roadblock. But to get that through the entire industry and to get everybody taking it and using it was a big thing. But we did it in a very, very short period of time, and BISG is very good at doing that. The same thing happened later on. You know, when we went to agency pricing for ebooks. Mm-hmm. Onyx had nothing in there for agency pricing for ebooks, and it was actually Fran Tulin who sounded the alarm and saying, "Oh, this is business." He said, "You know, we have to do it," and you know, we were able to respond to that because there is one place that can respond to those things for the entire industry, where the entire industry exists.
So, what's the lesson for you from that experience?
There are a couple, I think. First and foremost, as Phil emphasizes, the importance of getting everybody in a room and talking. I think that's probably the biggest. But ongoing education. So people who weren't there when all of this stuff was happening, when Onyx was being developed, when ISBN 13 was being developed, they don't understand the reasons why we did these things. You know, they kind of you come into a job as a young person and you just accept everything that's there. So, you know, it's been 20 years. A whole generation of book publishing staff are working with these identifiers that they've taken for granted. And we need to keep the reasoning of why we do things the way we do them fresh. Without always talking about, like, what it was like when we were kids.
Hey, you kids. So at lunch today, everybody's going to get a copy of the white paper for book publishing next. And Phil, you had a major hand in writing it. There were a lot of contributors, but you're also, in many ways, the person who inspired that project. What's your takeaway on it? I mean, how would you summarize it for this audience?
Things wear out. Things get old. We have a supply chain. The supply chain has worked. It's worked very well, but it was built for a very different industry than we find ourselves in today. It was a print industry. In those days, the publishers didn't deal with the readers directly very much. They really didn't. The bookstores did. And of course, there were signings and everything and like that. But it was a whole different dynamic. But the internet changed everything.
It did.
All of a sudden, I mean, I go back to AOL. AOL used to have these rooms that you can set up, and we started putting our authors in there to talk to their readers. It was hard to get them to do that because they're very shy. They were very shy people, and they weren't used to marketing, but they were able to do that. So that whole dynamic of how we reach our readers changed. Digital changed. The web changed. I was listening to what we were talking about before, when Jim was talking about getting more down at the community level. That's what the web is. The web is communities, all these different communities that we could reach marketing our books digitally to those people. TikTok, Facebook, everything that's going on now. That's not what our supply chain was built to do. It was still very siloed among all the different areas of the industry. And we needed to pull that together. The other thing is we're a very reactive industry by nature. We react to things that go on. Presumed Innocent came out, then all of a sudden we had this, this wave of books by lawyers. And then we had waves of books about wizards and witches, and then, vampires, and now romanticides. That's what we react to. We react to what's going on in the world. And we need to do that quickly. And the supply chain just didn't move that quickly. There wasn't a lot of transparency between the members of the supply chain. The way that we got things done was that, the BISG, we got everybody together and talked. Onyx is a wonderful thing. It really saved us and really helped us to get our data out there in a standard way, which, it saved us, and it works. The supply chain still works, but it could be better. Look at the pandemic. We had the basis for that, and we got through the pandemic because we had that basis of data and things like going out like that. But what we also learned from the pandemic, that we rely more on digital, we rely more on our data more than we ever did before. And having data that is accurate, that is transparent, that can move quickly. Onyx is great. Onyx is much more than metadata going up on a site. It does a lot of important things. But what we need to do now as a publisher, we want to, if something happens and we have an opportunity to market a book to a certain amount of people, we want that out immediately. Instantly. We want to be able to do that. When we're dealing with our vendors, we went through this a few years ago, and we go through it every fall where it's hard to get press time because everybody's trying to print all their books at the same time. And yet we don't have any visibility into our vendors. The vendors don't have visibility into us in terms of, so when something changes, if there's a press problem and they have to move a book, we should be able to know that immediately, not in an email or a message or anything like that, but we should just be getting that data because that's going to affect us and a lot of other books that we're producing. And on the other side, if we have to change, which happens all the time, you're changing schedules, we need to get that to our vendors so they can adjust their schedules properly. They're not losing time, we're not losing time. And we don't have that. One of the things, again, that I heard before that is very important about how Barnes & Noble went through their changes and how Firebrand is going about their changes, we have to stop just reacting to things and putting Band-Aids on things. What they did was they had a strategy. This is our strategy, and this is what we're going to follow to get where we need to be. The paper you're going to read is just a strategy. There aren't any answers on how we're going to do this. There are suggestions of what we should do, ideas to get the ball rolling, to talk to everybody, to get everybody's opinions, to get everybody's worries, and then to build a plan on that. There's strategy, and then there's the tactical part. We have to get the strategy right before we can do the tactical part, and that's, to me, was the whole point of this paper.
Thank you. And Laura, you've been in the industry, you've left the industry. We want you to come back.
Yes, I would love to come back.
But your perspective actually is that book publishing in all has its act together. Yeah,
it's astonishing, actually. So working in TV, working in advertising, there is no Onyx. There is no ISBN for ads. There is no ISBN for TV shows. There are identifiers, but they're not universally adopted. So you've got, competing identifiers, you've got competing standards, and a lot of proprietary data in proprietary formats that does not play nicely with other data. So, kudos to the book industry, because I've never encountered anything like Onyx anywhere else, or even ISBNs.
And I think you both have sort of said we do need to change what we have, but on the other hand, you've also said that what we have is not too bad.
It's very good.
So why is it that this project is important?
I think because, well, time doesn't stand still.
Yeah.
We're, as an industry, constantly evolving. And you have to meet, Phil brought up things like Book Talk. You've got to meet these new venues and channels in a way, again, where, publishers are playing nicely with one another. Yes, publishers are competitive, but everybody in this room wants people to read more, and that's important.
Yeah, and that is under threat. And Phil, from your perspective?
Everything has a lifetime.
Yes.
It does. And every once in a while, you have to look at it again, as we were talking about before, with fresh eyes. This happened in my own company with our former CIO, who retired before me, and I will never forgive him for that. He came in and he looked at how our systems talk to each other, and we had systems that had the same data in it, but it wasn't connected, and sometimes it was different. And he took a fresh look at this. He came out of actually the music industry, and he said, why are we doing this? Why don't we? And what we did was we said each system owns data. It's a system of truth, and that's where it gets started. That's where it gets changed. Ownership may change over time, but there needs to be one that's in charge of that data at any particular time, and then you feed that data where it needs to go. So we created a data hub. And that's when we put in Firebrand. It was a very big part of it because the title data is the most important. And that sends data to all of our other systems, our back office systems, our order-to-cash systems, our royalty systems, our sales reporting systems. Everything gets that data, and then that system gets data back that it needs from those other systems. And that's control over the data. And I think that is, we have to come back to the data. The data is the most important thing we have, and I think we undervalue it in this company, in this industry.
Which is, I can tell you, we do undervalue it, but other industries actively devalue it. So we're a little bit ahead there. But we have to address these issues, or we really risk going back to these proprietary walled garden. We don't want that.
No, I have a 25-year-old car. It's got 100,000 miles on it. I live in Manhattan. I never use it. It's still. Is
it available, or?
I'll take an offer. It runs great, but I've had to rebuild it. But it keeps running great, and I keep wanting to get rid of. Well, I do want to get a new car, but every time I want to. First was the pandemic; you couldn't get cars, and it was a shipping thing; you couldn't get cars. Now it's tariffs. But mechanically, it runs fine. There are a lot of other different things that it doesn't do. I still have a cassette player in there that hasn't been used in the last 20 years. It doesn't have any of the newer technology, the safety features, stuff like that. So there comes a time when you just have to look at it with fresh eyes and saying, it's time for something new. And it's hard to do. And the data problem, I can tell you, like when we've acquired a number of companies, which I've been a part of, and part of the reason why I retired over the last few years, we don't look at their data as being part of the value proposition for buying that company.
Right.
We buy the company for their assets and stuff like that, and then we said, okay, we're going to, we'll bring the data in later. We'll worry about the data later. The data integration, dealing with the data is the first thing you should do.
Yeah.
It's the most important thing that you should do. Because if you don't do it, It's like moving into a new house. There's two ways you can do it. You can be very careful, go through all your belongings, throw out all your crap before you move, so you're moving in fresh, or you can just throw all of your stuff into boxes, move it with you, and say, well, I'm going to take care of it later. You never take care of it later. It winds up in storage spaces for the rest of your life because you don't want to deal with it. It's the same thing with data. Like if you're putting in a new system, the first thing you should do is clean the data out in your old system because you're going to have bad data in it. It just happens. Don't bring bad data into a new system, and you do it. Or you say, and when they're talking about taking the time to do it, you have to take the time to do it right. You can't say, oh, we'll just take care of it in version 2, or we'll take care of it after we go live, because chances are something else is going to come up, and version 2 is going to take a long time to do. And you're just going to keep, bringing these things forward. So getting the full control of that data, having a place where there's clear ownership of the data, and you know that it's right, and that's the data that's going out to the entire world, that's what you want to get to, and that everybody shares in it, across, back and forth, two-way data communications, that kind of thing.
So when we were doing prep, believe it or not, we did prep. Laura, you invoked Fran Tulin,
Yes.
this is now the third Fran Tulin mention of the morning.
I know.
You'll have to tell him. But that Fran used to say that infrastructure is the last investment.
Yes, absolutely. And he would, I guess, the metaphor was plumbing. Nobody calls a plumber when the sink is just a little bit clogged. They only call when it's a problem, and that's, it becomes the problem. An investment in ensuring things run smoothly, incrementally, and we're talking a lot about incrementalism today. It's not that sexy, but it certainly, and it also runs against the prevailing emphasis on quick wins and all of that, but that kind of investment is super important. Keeping your car tuned, so it doesn't break down. The breakdown's gonna happen, so do as much as you can to prevent it and get ahead of it.
And help Phil, who has a 25-year-old car that has never left Manhattan. I mean, when I go to cocktail parties, which is not that often, but when I do, and people ask me what I do, I say, I start with I work in book publishing. And people are really excited because they think I'm like a publisher. And then I said, no, I'm the plumbing of the book business.
Yes.
Which generally gets me out of the conversation pretty quickly. We have time for questions from the audience if you'd like. Does anyone have any? Who has the microphone? There's someone coming down. You just want to go to Ted Hill, who's right here. And thank you to our students. We have graduate students from PACE and NYU that you'll hear about during the day, and they're helping here. Ted.
Hey guys, bringing back a lot of memories. Yeah, just real quickly, one thing we wrestled with, with the whole book publishing next is how do you get people to actually do something? And I'm wondering, and sometimes there are events that drive it, like, ISBN 13 and so forth, but I'm wondering whether you see now, I see a lot of concern about security and stability, hacking, and I'm wondering if you think that might drive some fundamental improvements in infrastructure, which is opportunities, obviously, to hitch on other things, that others might consider bells and whistles.
What you're thinking?
Well, the way that I was looking about how to get this done, what the next step with this is, I think, yes, all of those things. But I think what we need to do is again, this is a strategy, and I think we have to take the strategy out into the industry and this is basically all operational. This is not public, this is not editorial, it's not anything, everything is connected, and to talk to those people, the operations people, the people who feel the pain, the people who have to do these things and when we started working on this, I went right to the head of our operations, our COO, well, he's our co-CEO, but he's the head of operations. And I said, what's bothering you? What do you want to see? And he brought up returns, he brought up non-book product and how to move that type of thing, the things that they're looking for. And I think everybody's going to have a different answer. Security is certainly an issue. And that's a problem, and I think that's where you have to start. I think you have to, again, you have to take the time to do it right, to get this right, to find out what people really think the priorities are before you can put a plan together to address them.
I think you're thinking burning platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it kind of goes to what we were saying. We tend, as humans, to wait until there's an emergency before acting. I think in the case of security specifically, again, you're not the only one who is worried about hacking. You're not the only one who's worried about your data leaving the house without your permission. Get in a room with other people who are worried about the same thing and figure out what the solution should be that works for everyone, that's interoperable. I think that's the most important thing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have, when we dealt with a lot of the other problems like the ISBN 13, there was a deadline that we had to meet.
Yeah, and even with ISBN itself,
Yes.
when the ISBN was invented, there was an 800-pound gorilla in the room insisting that everybody use it.
Mm-hmm.
Much better than a dead elephant.
So, you had to appease the gorilla.
Right.
And, we're not, in the absence of a gorilla, you've got to just think strategically and also interoperably about how you're going to solve these problems.
But somebody might come up with that. When we're talking to somebody, they're going to say, this is the hot topic, which you didn't even realize. Because it is all connected. And,
Yes.
and if this is going to start, how is it going to affect everything else down the line? Again, it's a matter of timing and opportunity and, how things roll. Ebooks didn't take off until we had we had ebooks for a long time before they actually became viable because we had to get the technology right with e-ink and Sony, and we had to get the software right with EPUB, that it could really take off and could really expand. And it happened over, everybody got into ebooks because they thought this was going to be the next big thing. It was going to be a $1 billion a year industry, which missed by about $999 million in the first year, according to Accenture, because it wasn't ready yet. It was a great idea, but the timing wasn't there yet.
Oh, yeah, Barnes & Noble actually experienced some burn with that.
Yeah.
Because they got involved in ebooks. This is well before the Nook, well before the Kindle. And they got so badly burned, and I was there at the time. This was in, 1999, 2000.
James hadn't been born yet.
They got out of it.
Steve Riggio was running the digital side, and yeah, I mean, he invested heavily in ebooks at that time, and it was too early.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that ultimately Book Publishing Next says to me is that we can control our own destiny. We can make a plan, and akin to what Joshua and James were talking about, to open the day.
And BISG is the place to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we have
BISG is the
everyone
place to
there,
do it.
and we can oversee this.
But we do need a burning platform, and
we
maybe
need help.
cybersecurity.
And we're going to need help. It's a huge, huge project. And another reason to go out to talk to everybody is because we're going to need help doing it.
Yeah.
Thank
Yep.
you. Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming back to publishing. You're always welcome. And Phil, congratulations on your retirement. And at the break, he'll be taking bids on the car.